The Riddle of Thornfield Grange * Chapter 1. The Manor on the Hill, the Train to Netherby. Chugged through a drizzle-soaked quilt of fields, hedgerows stitching the hills like green thread. Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking. Softly, a pale wool scarf growing in her lap. The carriage smelled of damp wool and coal dust, and a young couple across the aisle murmured over a crumpled map. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind spectacles, missed nothing, though her thoughts were on Clara Bantry's letters, each one brimming with Netherby's gossip, centered on Thornfield Grange. "You'll find them a puzzle, Jane," Clara had written. "Sir Reginald rules like a tyrant, and his kin are fraying. Netherby's station was a brick shed, its platform slick with rain." Miss Marple stepped down, her shoes sinking into gravel, her hat tilted against the drizzle. Clara waited under a black umbrella, her round face flushed. "Jane, you're here," she cried, bundling her into a creaky Morris taxi that smelled of leather. As they rattled toward the village, Clara spilled the latest. Thornfield Grange, perched on a hill, was a cauldron of tension. Sir Reginald, 60 and widowed, threatened to disinherit his family. His son Gerald, 35, owed thousands to bookies. His daughter Beatrice, 28, chased a slick suitor named Vernon. His nephew Lawrence, 30, begged for art. Funds, and Eliza Gray, his ward, seemed his only ally, though Clara whispered, "She's too quiet, Jane." Clara's cottage was a haven of chintz and oak, scone scent thick in the air. Over Darjeeling, Clara spun tailies. Gerald pawned heirlooms. Beatrice sneaked letters to Vernon. Lawrence painted grim canvases, and Eliza drifted, clutching a locket. Miss Marple sipped tea, her needles pausing. "Families, Clara," she murmured, "unravel easily." A knock shattered their evening constable read, rain-soaked, his face pale. "Sir Reginald's dead," he stammered. Strangled in his study, door locked, key in his pocket. Clara's cup clattered. Impossible. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Improbable, Clara. Shall we see tomorrow?" Dawn broke gray, and Clara drove up to the Grange, its gates groaning open to a gravel drive. The manor loomed, its stone pitted, windows glinting like eyes. Inspector Harrow met them, a wiry man with a bristling mustache. "Nasty business," he said, leading to the study, a mahogany fortress, bookshelves soaring, desks strewn with papers. A velvet curtain, cord missing, framed a sealed window. A chalk outline marked Sir Reginald's fall. The green cord coiled nearby, knotted tight. Harrow pointed to the lock. Key in his pocket, windows latched, no footprints outside. Maybe a servant or a thief. Miss Marple stepped lightly, noting the dusks of smudged water. A burned letter in the Great Legacy glimpsed in ashen, a wax scuff on the sill. Not mud. "Curious," she murmured. Gerald burst in, brandy on his breath. "Solve it?" "Man," Beatrice followed, her silk dress rustling, eyes darting to Eliza, who clutched her locket. Lawrence slouched, paint-flecked, muttering of curses. Harrow bristled. "Everyone's a suspect." Miss Marple smiled. "A puzzle, Inspector. We'll find the pieces." She lingered, the scuff nagging her polished, deliberate. "At Clara's." By the fire, she knitted, the scarf lengthening. Clara paced. "A locked room, Jane?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. The knot, the ash, the scuff, Gerald's tremors, Beatrice's torn glove, Lawrence's paint, Eliza's locket each a thread. "Tomorrow, Clara, the tea shop." "People talk when you're just an old spinster?" Clara grinned. "You're up to something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Someone was clever, Clara, but not enough." The fire popped, and Netherby slept, the Grange's secrets locked tight. Chapter 2. Whispers in the village morning mist curled over Netherby's cobblestones as Miss Marple and Clara stepped from the cottage, the air sharp with dew and wood smoke. Clara's boots clicked, her chatter bubbling about the villages. Shock Sir Reginald's death was the talk of every doorstep. Miss Marple's scarf, half knit, peeked from her bag, her needles silent but her eyes scanning the lanes. Thatched roofs gleamed wet. Hollyhocks nodded by picket fences and a milkman's. Cart rattled past, its bottles jingling. The copper kettle lay at the village's heart, its windows steamed, lace curtains fluttering. Inside, the tea shop was a hive china clinked, scones steamed on plates, and villagers' voices hummed with gossip. Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her tweed coat draped over the chair, a teapot steaming before her. Clara ordered crumpets, her eyes darting to neighbors, whispering of thieves, servants, or family greed. Miss Marple sipped her Darjeeling, the cup warm in her hands, her ears catching every word Netherby's pulse beat here, and she meant to feel it. Mrs. Dunn, the baker's wife, leaned over a nearby table, her apron dusted with flour. Gerald's. In deep, mark me, she hissed to the butcher's sister. 5,000 owed to a London moneylender, saw it in the pub's ledger myself. Miss Marple's spoon stirred slowly, the sugar dissolving as she filed the sum away. Debts drove men to desperation, she knew. Mrs. Gibbs, the postmistress, joined the fray, her pince-nez glinting. Letters came for Sir Reginald, unsigned. Postmarked London, she said, voice low. One had a seal a lion's crest, fancy-like. Gone now, though. Miss Marple's eyes flicked up. The crest sparking a memory heraldry was never idle. Clara nudged her, whispering, "That's odd, Jane, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her smile faint, her mind turning the lion over like a coin. The shop door jingled, and Beatrice Thornfield swept in, her black silk dress stark against her pale cheeks. She ordered Lilla at the counter, her voice sharp when Mrs. Dunn mentioned Vernon. "Mind your business," Beatrice snapped, her neck flushing red. Miss Marple noted the tear in her glove, wider now, threads fraying like her composure. Clara leaned close. "She's nervy, Jane. That Vernon's trouble." Miss Marple murmured agreement, watching Beatrice leave, her heels clicking fast. The gossip swelled again. A farmer, wiping crumbs from his beard, spoke of Lawrence's row with Sir Reginald weeks ago, by the Grange's yews. Fists up, shouting about a painting, called it trash, he said. Miss Marple's cup paused mid-her. Pride, wounded, could fester into hate. A hush fell as Eliza Gray passed the window, her coat drab, her locket glinting as she headed toward the churchyard. Sir Reginald's shadow, a seamstress muttered, and others nodded, their eyes narrowing. Miss Marple set her cup down, the porcelain clinking softly. Eliza's solitude intrigued her, not guilt, perhaps, but something heavy. Clara finished her crumpet, crumbs dusting her scarf. "Where's she off to, Jane? Odd time for a stroll?" Miss Marple didn't answer, her gaze on the window, the mist swallowing Eliza's form. She rose, folding her napkin, and suggested. A walk Netherby's lanes held more than gossip, and she meant to find it. The village unfolded like a storybook. A red postbox glowed by the green. A cat slunk past the butcher's, and the pub's sign creaked in the breeze. Miss Marple paused by the postbox, where Mrs. Gibbs sorted letters, her hands quick. "That crest-sealed letter," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "Did it reach the Grange's hall?" Mrs. Gibbs blinked, then nodded. "Aye, but it vanished, never saw it after." Miss Marple thanked her, her smile disarming, but her mind raced. A missing letter was no accident. They passed the pub, Gerald's motor car parked askew, its tires muddy from haste. Clara clucked her tongue. "He's drowning his troubles." "Jane." Miss Marple nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Mud meant movement, perhaps the night of the murder. The churchyard lay beyond the green, its yews casting long shadows. Miss Marple lingered by the gate, seeing Eliza kneel at an unmarked grave, her locket twisting in her fingers. Clara whispered, "Whose grave, Jane?" Miss Marple shook her head. Not approaching grief demanded space, but she noted Eliza's stillness, her coat's hem damp with dew. A gardener, pruning nearby, glanced up, and Miss Marple greeted him, her tone light. "Busy times at the Grange?" she said. He grunted. "I saw Sir Reginald rowing with a stranger grey coat. City tight by the stables, weeks back." Miss Marple thanked him, her scarf shifting as she turned, the stranger's shadow lodging in her mind. Back at Thornfield Grange, Inspector Harrow was pacing the hall, his notebook flapping. "Found something, miss?" he asked, half irritated. Miss Marple smiled, following him to the study. The room felt colder now, its bookshelves looming like judges. She knelt by the desk, her fingers tracing a hidden drawer empty, its lock. Scratched as if pride, Clara gasped, "Jane, what's that?" Miss Marple stood, dusting her hands. "A place for secrets, Clara?" She eyed the curtain cord, coiled on the rug. It's not tight, a sailor's hitch, not a servant's fumble. Harrow announced Tom, the footman, arrested for stealing silver candlesticks. But Miss Marple watched Tom later, tying a parcel outside. His knots were clumsy, loose, nothing like the cord's craft. She shook her head, telling Clara, "He's no killer, just convenient." Evening settled over the cottage, the fire crackling as Clara poured fresh tea. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool soft under her fingers. Clara paced, her voice high. "That drawer, Jane, what was in it?" Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind weaving. Gerald's debts, Beatrice's flush, Lawrence's fists, Eliza's grave. The scratched drawer likely held that letter, the lion's crest, burned to ash. She pictured Vernon, his name souring Beatrice's face, his absence from the village odd. "Tomorrow, Clara," she said, "we'll learn more. People hide, but villages don't." Clara grinned, settling into her chair, but Miss Marple's eyes stayed on the fire, the riddle's threads tangling tighter. The village slept, its chimneys faint against the sky. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a pale heap by the lamp. The tea shop had given her pieces, debts, letters, rose, grief, but pieces needed fitting. Gerald's motorcar nagged. Her mud meant travel, perhaps to London, where debts and letters converged. Beatrice's glove, torn wider, suggested haste or fear. Lawrence's painting, rejected, could fuel rage, but Eliza's locket felt personal, tied to that grave. The stranger's gray coat flickered in her thought city men brought trouble, and trouble brought courts. She climbed the stairs, her steps light, the cottage creaking. Netherby was small, but secrets were smaller, slipping through cracks like smoke. Chapter 3. The hidden drawer rain topped Clara's cottage as morning broke, the sky a sodden quilt over Netherby's roofs. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting idle, her scarf folded beside a cold teacup. Constable Reed's words echoed Sir Reginald, strangled, the study locked, and she turned the puzzle over, the wax scuff and burned letter sharp in her mind. Clara bustled in, her apron dusted with flour, her voice bright. "Jane, you're up early thinking of that footman, Tom?" Miss Marple smiled, her spectacles glinting. Tom's arrest nagged her. Silver theft was petty, but murder required. Craft and his clumsy knots didn't fit. She rose, pulling her coat tight, and suggested a visit to the police station. Harrow needed nudging, and she meant to nudge gently. The station was a brick box, its desk ink-stained, a clock ticking. Loud, Harrow stood by a filing cabinet, his mustache twitching as Miss Marple entered, Clara trailing. "Miss Marple, this isn't a tea party," he said, flipping his notebook. She nodded, her voice mild. "About Tom, Inspector, his knots, when tying boots, are loose, not like the cord's hitch." Harrow frowned, but she pressed on, recalling. "Tom's parcel yesterday fumbling, nothing like the study's noose." Clara nodded eagerly, her scarf slipping. "She's right, Inspector." Harrow sighed, agreeing to release Tom, muttering of paperwork. Miss Marple thanked him, her smile disarming, but her mind was on the desk drawer empty, scratched, a secret's ghost. Netherby's lanes glistened as they walked to the antique shop, Clara chatting of Village Whispers, Tom's release. Wood stirred tongues. The shop was a cave of polished wood, clocks ticking, teapots gleaming. Gerald Thornfield stood at the counter, pawning a silver clock, his eyes bloodshot, his voice low. "Need cash, Harris," he muttered to the shopkeeper. Miss Marple, browsing teapots, caught his words. Sir Reginald refused a loan, leaving. Gerald desperate. His cufflinks gleamed, one missing, the other etched with a crest. Clara whispered, "Jane, he's frantic." Miss Marple nodded, buying a chipped cup, her smile softening Harris's stare. Gerald stormed out, villagers' eyes following, and she noted the crest lion, like Mrs. Gibbs's letter. The Grange's rose garden was next, its blooms drooping. Under rain, Beatrice sat on a bench, her silk dress damp, her glove torn wider now. Miss Marple approached, Clara holding an umbrella, and asked after her health, voice gentle. Beatrice's eyes flickered, then spilled Vernon proposed elopement. But Sir Reginald forbade it, threatening to cut her off. "He'd leave me nothing," she whispered, a thorn snagging her glove's cheer. Miss Marple patted her hand, noting her tremble fear, not guilt, she thought. Clara clucked sympathy, but Miss Marple's mind was on Vernon, his name soured. Beatrice's face and his absence grew louder. Lawrence's attic studio was a chaos of canvases, turpentine sharp in the air. Miss Marple climbed the Grange's stairs, Clara puffing behind, and found him painting, his cuffs blue-flecked. He unveiled a portrait of Eliza, its shadows stark, her locket stark against her throat. "She's no ward," he said, voice bitter. "Found letters attic ones say she's his daughter." Miss Marple's scarf shifted, her eyes keen scandal bred motives, but Lawrence's anger felt raw, not calculated. Clara gasped, "Jane, it's huge." Miss Marple murmured agreement, her fingers brushing a paint jar ultramarine, vivid as the sea. The churchyard lay quiet, yews casting shadows over mossy graves. Miss Marple lingered by the gate, seeing. Eliza knew at an unmarked stone, her locket twisting in her fingers. Clara whispered, "Whose grave, Jane?" Miss Marple didn't approach, letting Eliza's grief breathe, but noted her coat's damp hem devotion, not deceit. A gardener, pruning nearby, looked up, and Miss Marple greeted him, her tone light. "Trouble at the Grange," she said. He nodded, wiping his brow. "Saw Sir Reginald Rowe with a stranger grey coat, city man by the stables, weeks ago." Miss Marple thanked him, her scarf catching a breeze, the stranger's coat a new thread. Back at the Grange, Miss Marple slipped into the study, Harrow away. The room was dim, its bookshelves looming. She knelt by the fireplace, sifting ash paper, yes, but cloth too, burned to hide something. Clara hovered, her voice low. "Jane." "What's that?" Miss Marple stood, dusting her hands. "More than a letter, Clara." The scratch drawer nagged her its contents. Perhaps that crest-sealed note were gone, but their shadow lingered. She eyed the cord, its sailor's hitch too neat for Tom or Gerald. Vernon's name flickered Beatrice's flush, his absence the knot's craft. Evening draped Clara's cottage, the fire crackling as tea steamed. Miss Marple knitted her, scarf lengthening, its wool soft. Clara paced, her voice high. "That ash, Jane cloth." Miss Marple nodded, sketching a lion crest in her mind. Gerald's cufflink, Mrs. Gibbs's letter, Lawrence's hint. Eliza's grave weighed heaviest, her mother's likely tied to that scandal. "Tomorrow, Clara," she said, "we'll dig deeper. Secrets don't burn clean." Clara grinned, settling down, but Miss Marple's eyes stayed on the fire, the stranger's grey coat weaving into the riddle's threads. The village slept, its lanes dark, the Grange's windows black. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf, a pale heap. Gerald's missing cufflink, Beatrice's torn glove, Lawrence's paint, Eliza's locket, each a clue, but the ashes cloth puzzled her. A glove, perhaps, or a sleeve, burned to hide a trace. The stranger's row suggested blackmail, tied to that codicil Lawrence implied. She climbed the stairs, the cottage creaking, her steps light. Netherby held its breath, and she would listen for its exhale. Chapter 4. A stranger's shadow rain drummed on Thornfield Grange's windows. The morning gray as slate, and Miss Marple sat in the dining room, her knitting tucked beside a teacup. Clara Bantry, opposite, buttered toast, her chatter stalled. By the family's arrival, Gerald slumping into a chair, Beatrice adjusting her scarf, Lawrence glaring at his plate, Eliza silent with her locket. A stranger entered, introduced by Gerald as Mr. Crean, a London detective, his briefcase snapping. Open like a gunshot. Sir Reginald hired me, Crane said, his voice clipped, fearing blackmail over his will. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes sharp behind spectacles. Blackmail was a spark, and sparks lit fires. Clara whispered, "Jane, what's the snow?" But Miss Marple only sipped her tea, watching Gerald's flush, Beatrice's fidget, Lawrence's scowl. Crane spoke of a codicil, missing since Sir Reginald's death, its contents secret but vital. Gerald slammed his cup down, brandy lacing his breath. Rubbish. Father was hale. Miss Marple noted his tremor guilt, or fear of loss. The Grange's kitchen was next, its air thick with coal smoke and baking bread. Miss Marple slipped in, Clara trailing, to find Beatrice at the hearth, a note curling to ash in the flames. Beatrice gasped, her glove snagging as she turned, the tear gaping now. "Just a list," she stammered, but Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her question softer. "From Vernon, perhaps?" Beatrice's flush deepened, her voice low. She admitted Vernon wrote of plans, urging haste, but swore she burned it from shame. Clara clucked, stirring soup, but Miss Marple saw the ashes weight a plan wasn't a list. She offered Beatrice tea, her eyes catching the glove's blue fleck, faint but sharp, like Lawrence's paint. The kitchen clock ticked, and Miss Marple filed the note away, its words lost, but its intent loud. Netherby's lanes were slick as Miss Marple and Clara walked to the Grange's attic, the manor's ivy dripping. Lawrence met them, his studio a chaos of canvases, turpentine biting the air. "What now?" he muttered, paint flecking his cuffs. Miss Marple mentioned Eliza, her voice mild, and Lawrence's eyes narrowed. He'd seen her in the study the night before the murder, rifling the desk, her locket glinting. "Thought she was after papers," he said, brushing a jar of ultramarine. Miss Marple nodded, her scarf shifting, but doubted Eliza's hands tied that court grief didn't knot so tight. Clara gasped, "Jane, is she guilty?" Miss Marple murmured, "Not yet, Clara," her mind on Lawrence's paint, its hue matching the study's scuff. The village inn was a haze of ale and smoke, its tables crowded as Miss Marple entered, Clara at her side. Crane sat with Gerald, papers spread, his voice low, the codicil favored Eliza, perhaps naming her Sir Reginald's daughter, cutting Gerald and Beatrice out. Gerald's fist hit the table, glasses rattling. "Lies, she's no kin." Miss Marple settled nearby, ordering tea, her ears open. A barmaid, wiping mugs, leaned close, whispering Vernon boasted of easy money last week, his grin too wide. Miss Marple's cut pos money tied to codicils, and Vernon tied to Beatrice. Clara nudged her. "Jane, that's fishy." Miss Marple nodded, noting Vernon's absence today, his name a shadow across the inn's chatter. Back at the Grange, Miss Marple slipped into the study, the room dim, its bookshelves looming like sentinels. Harrow was absent, and Clara hovered, her scarf slipping. Miss Marple knelt by the desk, tracing the blotter's smudges ink, pressed hard, forming codicil. She stood, her fingers brushing the curtain cord. Its sailors hitched stark, and not of Netherby, but of ports and ropes. Clara whispered, "Jane, what's it mean?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. The knot spoke of skill, and Vernon's. Both rang louder. She pictured his hands, deft, perhaps too deft, tying more than promises to Beatrice. Clara hosted tea at her cottage, the parlor cozy with firelight, scones warm on a tray. Gerald arrived, surly, Beatrice pale, Lawrence sullen. Eliza absent, Vernon too, his chair empty. Miss Marple poured tea, her questions light, but Vernon's name drew Beatrice's spill, her cup clattering. "He's away," she snapped, her glove's tear catching Clara's eye. Miss Marple noted Vernon's cufflinks, glimpsed at the inn. Etched like Gerald's, missing one a lion's crest, tying threads tighter. Lawrence muttered of Eliza's secrets, Gerald of debts, but Miss Marple's eyes stayed on Beatrice, her flush a map of fear. Evening deepened, Netherby's lanes dark, the cottage's fire crackling. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool soft under lamplight. Clara paced, her voice high. "That codicil, Jane changes everything." Miss Marple's. Needles clicked, her mind weaving. Crane's blackmail, Beatrice's note, Lawrence's claim, the knot's craft. Eliza's search wasn't theft, she thought, perhaps protection. Vernon's boasts, his cufflinks, his absence, they pointed like arrows. "Tomorrow, Clara," she said, "we'll follow the stranger's shadow. It falls on the family." Clara grinned, settling down, but Miss Marple's gaze held the fire, the riddle's edges sharpening. The village slept, its chimneys faint, the Grange's windows black. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a pale heap. The blotter's codicil nagged her, a will rewritten, a daughter named. Beatrice's ash hid Vernon's plans, but plans needed hands, and hands left traces. Lawrence's paint matched the scuff, but his anger felt blunt, not sharp like a noose. Gerald's debts drove him, yet his fists seemed empty of murder. Eliza's locket weighed heavy as truth, not guilt, lay there. She climbed the stairs, the cottage creaking, her steps light. Netherby whispered, and she listened, the knot's shadow growing clearer. Chapter 5. The codicil's clue. London's bustle greeted Miss Marple as her train steamed into Paddington. The platform a swirl of hats and suitcases, the air sharp with coal and haste. She clutched her knitting bag, her scarf peeking out, and hailed a cab, its driver grumbling through traffic to Crane's office, a smoky den of ledgers and ink, tucked above a tailor's. Crane rose, his tie askew, offering tea she declined. "The codicil," she said, voice mild. "What of it?" He sighed, papers rustling. Sir Reginald named Eliza his daughter, born of a secret affair, cutting Gerald and Beatrice from the will to shield a scandal. Miss Marple's spectacles glinted. A daughter changed motives, and motives tied cords. She thanked him, her smile disarming, but noted his hesitation. Crane knew more, perhaps of that gray-coated stranger. The cab back was loud, horns blaring, but her mind was on Eliza, her locket a key to truths unspoken. Netherby's quiet was a balm, its lanes glistening as Miss Marple stepped from the station, Clara waiting with her Morris. "Jane, you're back," Clara cried, driving to the cottage. Her chatter of Vernon's absence, he'd vanished, leaving a note accusing Lawrence of spying. Miss Marple's scarf shifted, her thoughts on Vernon's flight guilt fled, but left traces. They detoured to Lawrence's studio, the Grange's attic dim, canvases strewn like leaves. Lawrence, paint-flecked, denied spying, his voice sharp, but Miss Marple's eyes caught a jar ultramarine, vivid as the study's scuff. "Your paint travels," she said, her tone light. Lawrence flushed, muttering of accidents, but Clara whispered, "Jane, that's no coincidence." Miss Marple nodded, the scuff of thread now tied to Vernon's shadow. The village fete unfolded on the green, bunting fluttering, cider stalls pungent under a rare sun. Miss Marple strolled with Clara, her knitting bag slung over her arm, children laughing as fiddles played. Eliza stood by a cake stall, her locket glinting, her eyes wet when Miss Marple approached. "You knew of the codicil?" Miss Marple said softly, offering a handkerchief. Eliza nodded, her voice breaking. She'd learned of her birth, but feared. Exposure, not wealth. "I'd never hurt him," she whispered, tears falling. Miss Marple patted her arm, her heart sure Eliza's grief was no killer's mask. Clara bought a bun, her voice low. "Jane, she's clear, isn't she?" Miss Marple murmured agreement, but her eyes scanned the crowd, Vernon's absence louder than the music. Gerald lurched by the cider tent, his tie loose, voice slurring. Of Vernon's schemes. Miss Marple paused, her scarf catching a breeze, and listened. Gerald ranted of debts, of Vernon promising relief, but failing. Villagers stared, their whispers sharp, and Miss Marple noted Gerald's hands shaky, not steady like a noose's maker. Clara clucked, "He's a mess, Jane." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on Vernon's boasts, the barmaid's tale echoing money, always money. She slipped away, finding the barmaid at the inn, wiping glasses, her grin sly. "Vernon had tattoos," she said, unprompted. "Sailor's kind, anchors and ropes." Miss Marple's cup stilled, the knot's hitch flashing Vernon's hands. Deft at sea, tied more than tailies. Back at the Grange, Miss Marple tested the curtain cord, alone in the study, its shadows deep. She looped the hitch, her fingers slow, but sure a sailor's knot, needing skill Vernon owned. Clara burst in, her scarf awry. "Jane, what's that?" Miss Marple smiled, coiling the cord. A signature, Clara. The scuff nagged her. Ultramarines trace, tying Lawrence loosely, but Vernon tightly. She pictured his tattoos, his note, his flight fear, not innocence, drove him. The desk's blotter lay untouched, its codicil smudge a ghost of Eliza's truth, now clear. Miss Marple's scarf slipped, her thoughts on Gerald's rant debts bound him to Vernon, but not to murder. Evening fell, the feet's lantern swaying. Netherby's green quiet. Miss Marple sat at Clara's, knitting by firelight, her scarf lengthening, its wool warm. Clara poured tea, her voice high. "Eliza's no killer, Jane, but Vernon." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind weaving. Crane's codicil, Lawrence's paint, Vernon's knot, Gerald's debts. Eliza's tears freed her, but Vernon's. Absence accused him tattoos, and hitches didn't lie. "Tomorrow, Clara," she said, "we'll find Vernon." "He's not far." Clara grinned, settling with a scone, but Miss Marple's eyes held the fire. The riddle's shape, clear greed, not love, tied that cord. The village slept, its roofs dark, the Grange's chimneys faint. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a soft heap. Vernon's note accused Lawrence, but paint wasn't rope Vernon's hands were. Gerald's cider-soaked rage hid no cunning, Beatrice's fear no malice, Eliza's grief no plot. The codicil's truth, Eliza's birth, sparked Vernon's panic. She thought, and panic made knots. She climbed the stairs, the cottage creaking, her steps light. Netherby's secrets stirred, and she would stir them further, the sailor's shadow looming large. Chapter 6. Tangled lies. Dawn broke damp over Netherby, mist cloaking the village's lanes as Miss Marple sipped tea at Clara's, her knitting idle, her scarf folded by the lamp. Inspector Harrow's note had come at sunrise. Vernon found, hiding in a barn near Wickham, claiming Gerald's threats drove him off. Miss Marple's spectacles glinted. Threats were loud, but knots were silent, and Vernon's hands intrigued her. Clara bustled in, her apron tied, her voice sharp. "Jane." "They've got him. What now?" Miss Marple rose, pulling her coat tight, and suggested the station Vernon's tale needed hearing, and she meant to listen closely. The Morris rattled through the village, past the tea shop's steamed windows, the post box's red glow, and Miss Marple noted a quiet Netherby held its breath, waiting for truth. The station was cold, its bench hard. Vernon slouched under Harrow's glare. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag at her feet, her smile mild as Vernon spoke Gerald's shouts. His debts forced him to flee, he said, his eyes darting. She watched. His hands, tying a bootlace, a sailor's knot, swift, matching the cord's hitch. Curious, she said softly, Clara nudging her. Jane, that's it. Vernon's smirk faltered, but Miss Marple only nodded. Her mind on the study's scuff, the knot's craft tying Vernon tighter than his lies. Harrow scoffed. He's no killer, just a coward, but Miss Marple's eyes stayed on Vernon's. Fingers deft, too deft for innocence. The Grange's study was dim as Miss Marple returned, Clara hovering, the air heavy with polish and dust. She knelt by the window, tracing the scuff ultramarine, yes, but angled like a ladder's rung. Not a brush's slip. Entry, not exit, she murmured, picturing Vernon climbing in, cord in hand. Clara gasped, her scarf slipping. Jane, a ladder? Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the sill wax hid haste, but not truth. She stood, eyeing the desks. Scratch drawer, its emptiness loud, whatever it held. Vernon feared it. The cord lay coiled, its hitch a sailor's signature, and Miss Marple's scarf shifted. Her thoughts on Lawrence, his paint, his anger, a distraction. Lawrence met them in the hall, his cuffs blue-flecked, his voice sharp. Vernon's back. Is he? Miss Marple mentioned the latter, her tone light, and Lawrence flushed. He'd moved it, he admitted, snooping Sir Reginald's papers. Not killing. Found nothing, he muttered, paint smudging his hands. Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle. Lawrence's pride was no noose, but his paint tied him loosely to the scuff. Clara whispered, Jane, he's honest? Miss Marple murmured, Enough, Clara, her mind on Vernon's knot, its lips surer than Lawrence's guilt. Beatrice's bedroom was next, its rosewater scent sharp, curtains drawn against the rain. Miss Marple knocked, Clara behind, and Beatrice answered. Her. Silk robe loose, her glove blue stain now on the dresser. What's this? She snapped, but Miss Marple's question was soft Vernon's plans. What were they? Beatrice's eyes fell, her voice low, she'd spied for him, passing Sir Reginald's words, fearing his wrath. The glove stain caught Miss Marple's eye ultramarine like the scuff, but Beatrice swore she'd only followed, not climbed. Clara clucked, Jane, she's trapped. Miss Marple patted Beatrice's arm, her mind on Vernon, his sway over her was no accident. The Grange's library was a vault of leather and dust, where Eliza waited, her locket glinting, a diary in her hands. Miss Marple settled beside her, Clara peering over, and Eliza spoke her mother's words, found in the attic, proved Sir Reginald's affair, her birth a scandal. He loved me, she whispered, tears falling, but I'd never kill. Miss Marple nodded, her scarf soft against her coat. Eliza's motive was grief, not greed, her locket no noose. Clara's eyes welled. Jane, she's true. Miss Marple murmured agreement, but her thoughts were on Vernon the codicils. Threat drove him, not Eliza. Harrow joined them at the inn, his notebook flapping. Lawrence his target paint, ladder motive, he said. Miss Marple demurred, her voice mild. The ladder's key, Inspector, but Vernon's hands tied the knot. She pictured the barn, Vernon's bootlace, the study's scuff, each pointed past Lawrence's bluster. The inn's ale mugs clinked. Villagers whispering at Vernon's return, and Miss Marple sipped tea, her eyes on the barmaid, who'd seen his tattoos. Clara leaned close. Jane, you're sure? Miss Marple nodded, her scarf catching a draft Vernon's lies tangled, but knots held fast. Evening draped Clara's cottage, the fire crackling, tea steaming. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool warm under lamplight. Clara paced, her voice high. Vernon's at Jane, isn't he? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind sketching the ladder's path up the sill, cord in hand, Sir Reginald unaware. Lawrence's paint was a shadow, Beatrice's glove a mistake, Eliza's diary a truth, but Vernon's knot was the riddles. Hark, tomorrow, Clara, she said. We'll test him. Lies unravel fast. Clara grinned, settling with a biscuit, but Miss Marple's eyes held the fire, the sailor's shadow stark. Netherby slept, its lanes dark, the Grange's windows black. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a soft heap. Vernon's barn tale hid fear, not threats. Gerald's shouts were noise, not murder. Beatrice's spying fed Vernon, but her. Tears cleared her. Lawrence's latter move was folly, not crime, his paint a red herring. Eliza's birth sparked the codicil, but her hands were clean. The scuff's wax, the knot's hitch, the drawer's scratch, all pointed to Vernon, his greed a noose. She climbed the stairs, the cottage creaking, her steps light. The riddle tightened, and she would pull its threads. Chapter 7. The sailor's knot twilight draped Thornfield Grange, its windows glinting like wary eyes as Miss Marple stood in the dining room, her knitting bag at her feet, a length of cord in her hands. Clara Bantry hovered near the sideboard, polishing a teapot, her eyes darting to the family gathered at the mahogany table. Gerald slouched, brandy sour on his breath. Beatrice twisting her torn glove. Lawrence glaring at his untouched plate. Eliza clutching her locket, her face pale. Inspector Harrow leaned by the door, his mustache twitching, his notebook ready. Miss Marple's voice was mild, her spectacles. Catching candlelight. A knot, you see, tells a story, she said, looping the cord into a sailor's hitch, its coils tight as the steady's noose. Vernon, seated last, twitched, his cufflinks lying crested flashing, and Miss Marple noted his flush, faint but sharp, like guilt's first blush. Clara whispered, Jane, you're bold. But Miss Marple only smiled, her fingers deft, the knot a mirror to the crime. Gerald slammed his glass down, the clink echoing. What's this nonsense? Father's dead, and you're playing with rope? Miss Marple met his glare, her tone gentle. Not playing, Monsieur Thornfield, observing. She held the knot up, its loops stark, and asked Vernon to tie one. His hands fumbled, the hitch clumsy, unlike the study's craft. Beatrice's breath caught, her gloves tear gaping, and Lawrence muttered, Show off. Miss Marple set the cord down, her scarf shifting, and spoke of the ladder found in the Grange's shed, moved after the murder, its rung matching the study's scuff. Someone climbed in, she said, her eyes on Vernon, whose smirk faltered. Clara's teapot clattered, her voice low. Jane, you're close. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving Vernon's knot, the ladder's trace, the codicil's threat. Harrow stepped forward, his boots creaking, and demanded proof. Miss Marple obliged, her voice steady. She'd traced the ladder's path. Wax on the sill, hiding haste, ultramarine paint flecking its rungs, like Lawrence's jars. Lawrence surged up, his cuffs blue-stained. I moved it, yes, but not for murder snooping, that's all. Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. His anger was no noose, but Vernon's silence was. She turned to Gerald, asking of Vernon's hire, his debts, his desperation. Gerald's face reddened, his voice cracking. I paid him to scare father loans. Not death. He swore he'd fix it. Miss Marple's spectacles glinted. Fear drove Gerald, but Vernon's hands tied tighter. Clara whispered, Jane, he's trapped. But Miss Marple's eyes stayed on Vernon, his cufflinks winking like clues. Beatrice rose, her silk dress rustling, her voice sharp. Vernon's no killer, he loved me. Miss Marple's question was soft, her glove, found in the shed. Blue-stained, what of it? Beatrice faltered, tears welling. She'd followed Vernon, fearing his plans, but swore she'd only watched. I hid there after, she whispered, the gloves stain a mistake, not murder. Miss Marple patted her arm, her scarf soft against her coat. Beatrice's love blinded her, but cleared her hands. Lawrence scoffed. She's lying, but Miss Marple shook her head, the shed's dust tying Vernon, not Beatrice. Harrow scribbled, his pen loud, and Miss Marple noted Eliza's stillness, her locket glinting. No killer sat there, only truth. Eliza stood, her voice trembling, a diary open in her hands. Father loved me, she said, reading her mother's shame, Sir Reginald's affair, her birth a scandal he hid. I'd never harm him. Tears fell, her locket snapping shut, and Miss Marple nodded, her heart sure Eliza's grief was no motive, her diary a shield. Clara's eyes welled. Jane, she's clear. Miss Marple murmured agreement, but her thoughts were on Vernon, the codicil named Eliza. Threatened his easy money, and knots followed. Vernon shifted, his voice sharp. This is madness. I fled Gerald's threats, not guilt. Miss Marple's smile was faint. Lies were ropes, and his were fraying. The village buzzed beyond the grange, lanterns glowing in the dusk, whispers of Vernon's return spreading. Miss Marple and Clara walked to the inn, Harrow trailing, his boots heavy. Villagers crowded tables, ale mugs clinking, and the barmaid leaned close, her grin sly. Vernon city debts heard him curse them, she said. Miss Marple sipped tea, her scarf catching a draft debts drove Vernon like Gerald, but his hands were steadier. Harrow questioned Vernon again, his voice gruff, but Vernon denied all, his smirk forced. Miss Marple noted his cufflinks, matching. Gerald's lost one, their lion snarling small, but threads tied tight. Clara's cottage glowed with firelight, the evening deep, Netherby's lanes dark. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool warm under lamplight. Clara paced, her teacup steaming. Vernon's cornered Jane, he twitched at that knot. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind sketching. Gerald's hire, Beatrice's glove. Lawrence's ladder, Eliza's diary. Vernon's denial was. Noise the knot was his signature, the codicil his fear. Tomorrow, Clara, she said, we'll press him. Greed ties tight, but truth cuts. Clara grinned, settling with a biscuit, but Miss Marple's eyes held the fire. The riddle's heart beating Vernon's hands, not Gerald's, wove the noose. The grange loomed silent, its chimneys faint against the sky. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a soft heap. Gerald's brandy hid shame, not cunning. Beatrice's tears washed her clean. Lawrence's paint was folly, not crime. Eliza's locket held love, not hate. Vernon's twitch, his cufflinks, his debts, they pointed like stars to a sailor's. Greed. The shed's ladder, waxed to hide, carried him in. The knot, tied with skill, held him fast. She pictured the study, Sir Reginald unaware, Vernon's hands, swift panic, not plan, sparked murder. The clock chimed, the cottage creaking, and Miss Marple climbed the stairs, her steps light. Netherby whispered, and she would answer. Chapter 8. Motives unraveled. Morning mist curled over Netherby's roofs. The village hushed as Miss Marple sat at Clara's table, her knitting idle, a telegram from London crisp in her hands. Crane's words were Stark Vernon's alias, James. Carver, a conman tied to Gerald's moneylender, surfaced in city records, his schemes bleeding estates dry. Miss Marple's spectacles glinted. Vernon's boasts of easy money were no jest, and the codicil's threat drove him to murder. Clara bustled in, her apron flower-dusted, her voice high. Jane, more news? Miss Marple nodded, folding the telegram, and suggested the Grange Harrow needed this, and Vernon's mask was slipping. The Morris rattled through lanes, past the tea-shop's glow, the churchyard's yews, and Miss Marple noted a stillness. Netherby sensed a storm, and she meant to stir it. The Grange's hall was cold, its chandelier dim, as Harrow met them, his notebook flapping. Prints on the ladder, he said, Vernon's clear as day. Miss Marple's scarf shifted, her smile faint. The shed's dust held truth, and Vernon's hands left traces. She asked to see Beatrice, and they found her in the conservatory, its air humid, orchids wilting under glass. Beatrice sat, her silk dress creased, tears soaking a handkerchief. I loved him, she whispered, unprompted, her glove clean. Now whisting. Miss Marple's question was soft Vernon's promises. What were they? Beatrice's voice broke. He'd sworn wealth, a new life, but his lies dawned late, his city debts a trap. Clara clucked, Jane, she's heartbroken. Miss Marple nodded, her heart sure Beatrice's love was no murder, her tears no noose. The study beckoned, its shadows deep, bookshelves looming like judges. Miss Marple knelt by the grate, sifting. Ash paper, cloth, and vellum burned to hide the codicil's truth. Clara hovered, her scarf slipping. Jane, what's that? Miss Marple stood, dusting her hands. Sir Reginald's will. Naming Eliza was ash, but Vernon's fear wasn't. She pictured him climbing, cord ready, panic sparking as Sir Reginald scoffed at threats. The scuffs wax, the knots hitch. The drawers scratch all his marks. Harrow joined them, his voice gruff. Gerald's talking says Vernon pushed him. Miss Marple nodded, her scarf catching a draft. Gerald's debts bound him, but Vernon's greed killed. Gerald waited in the library, brandy gone, his face haggard. Miss Marple settled opposite, Clara pouring tea, and asked of Vernon's higher truth. Now, Gerald's hands shook. His voice low, he paid Vernon to secure the estate, clear his debts, but knew no murder. He lied, Gerald muttered, eyes wet. Miss Marple's spectacles glinted. Shame cleared Gerald, his fists empty of cords. Clara whispered, Jane, he's broken. Miss Marple murmured agreement, but her thoughts were on Vernon. The codicil's loss was his gain. Until Eliza's name surfaced. Gerald's debts were chains, but Vernon's hands forged them. Eliza stood by the Grange's gates, her locket open, a breeze lifting her hair. Miss Marple approached, Clara behind, and Eliza spoke. She'd donate the Grange to Netherby's poor, honoring her mother's shame, her father's love. No wealth for me, she said, her voice steady. Miss Marple patted her arm, her scarf soft. Eliza's gift was no killer's act, her locket a vow. Clara's eyes welled. Jane, she's noble. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was on Vernon, his con unraveled, his prince damning, his not a noose. She pictured the barmaid's tale, his tattoos flashing anchors, ropes, sailors. Life turned sour. The inn was smoky, villagers whispering as Miss Marple entered, Clara ordering tea. Harrow sat with Vernon, tough now, his smirk gone. I'm no killer, Vernon snapped, but Miss Marple's voice was mild as alias. Carver tied him to fraud, his prince to the ladder, his knot to death. Vernon's eyes darted, his cufflinks dull, and Miss Marple noted his sweat fear. Not lies broke him. The barmaid leaned close, her voice low. Heard him curse a codicil city talk, angry. Miss Marple sipped tea, her scarf steady Vernon's greed, locked the study, but she'd unlock it. Clara nudged her. Jane, he's done. Miss Marple murmured, nearly Clara. Clara's cottage glowed with firelight, evening deep. Netherby's lanes dark. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool warm. Clara paced, her teacup steaming. Vernon's caught Jane Prince, alias all. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind sketching. Beatrice's tears. Gerald's shame, Eliza's gift, Vernon's not. The codicil's ash hid Eliza's birth, but Vernon's hands burned it. Fear of loss, not love, drove him. Tomorrow, Clara, she said, we'll set a trap. Truth catches fast. Clara grinned, settling with a scone, but Miss Marple's eyes held the fire. The riddle's end near Vernon's greed, not Gerald's, sealed the study. The village slept, its chimneys faint, the Grange's windows black. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a soft heap. Beatrice's love was blind, not deadly. Gerald's debts were heavy, not fatal. Eliza's locket held peace, not plots. Vernon's alias tied into crime, his prince to the ladder, his not to murder Sir Reginald's scoff, the codicil's threat sparked panic, and panic tied cords. She pictured the study, Vernon climbing, wax hiding haste, the drawer empty. But damning. The clock chimed, the cottage creaking, and Miss Marple climbed the stairs, her steps light. Netherby's secrets cracked, and she would break them wide. Chapter 9. The Trappist set dust settled over Netherby, the village's lanes glowing with lantern light, the air crisp with autumn's bite. Miss Marple stood in Clara Bantry's parlor, her knitting folded beside a teacup, her spectacles catching. The fire's glow as she outlined her plan a gathering at Thornfield Grange, a whisper of the codicil found, bait to draw Vernon's hand. Clara paced, her scarf trailing, her voice high with excitement. "Jane, you're daring. He'll bolt." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her fingers brushing her scarf. Vernon's greed was a tide, and tides pulled true. She'd sent word to Inspector Harrow, asking his men to wait in the Grange's shadows, their boots silent by the study door. The village hummed beyond, gossip swirling Vernon's return, his city debts, the latter's prince, and Miss Marple knew Netherby's. Eyes would watch tonight as hers did now. The Grange's hall loomed grand, its chandelier casting frail light on polished marble as Miss Marple arrived, Clara clutching her arm. Gerald slouched by a tapestry, his brandy glass empty, his eyes bloodshot. Beatrice adjusted her silk shawl, her torn glove gone, her face pale. Lawrence leaned against a pillar, paint-flecked cuffs stark. Eliza sat, her locket glinting, her hand steady. Vernon entered last, his cufflinks lion-crested winking, his smirk forced. Miss Marple greeted them, her voice mild, and mentioned, "The codicil found," she said, "in the study's desk, its truth ready to speak." Vernon's jaw tightened, a bead of sweat on his brow, and Miss Marple noted it. Her scarf soft against her coat greed flinched, and flinches betrayed. Harrow lingered. By the door, his mustache twitching, his nod subtle, his men were set, cloaked in the corridor's gloom. Miss Marple led the family to the dining room, candles flickering on the mahogany table, their flames dancing in Beatrice's eyes. She spoke of Sir Reginald's will, her tone gentle, his love for Eliza, his shame hidden, now clear. Gerald muttered rubbish, but stayed seated, his hands shaky. Beatrice's shawl slipped, her breath quick, and Lawrence scoffed, "Old news." Eliza's locket snapped open, a tiny portrait gleaming her mother. Miss Marple guessed and nodded, her heart sure Eliza's truth was no news. Vernon's chair creaked, his fingers drumming, and Miss Marple's eyes flicked to him. The codicil's shadow loomed, and he felt it. Clara poured tea, her hands unsteady, the clink of china loud in the hush. Miss Marple paused, her spectacles glinting, and said she'd left the codicil in the study careless, perhaps, but safe for now. Vernon's smirk vanished, his cufflinks catching light as he rose, muttering of a cigarette. Miss Marple's smile was faint. Bait taken, the trap sprung. She continued, asking Gerald of debts, Beatrice of Vernon's promises, Lawrence of paint, each answer sharp, defensive, but honest. The family's threads untangled Gerald's shame, Beatrice's love, Lawrence's pride, Eliza's grief, but Vernon's absence grew loud, his steps echoing down the hall. The study's door creaked, and Miss Marple excused herself, Clara, trailing, her scarf slipping. Harrow's men moved, boots soft on the rug, and found Vernon at the desk, the hidden drawer pried open, his hands empty but guilty. "Nothing here," he snapped, but Harrow's cuffs clicked, his voice gruff. "Enough, Carver." Miss Marple entered, her scarf steady, and spoke the ladder's rung. Wax to hide, carried him in. The sailor's knot, deft as his tattoos, choked Sir Reginald. Beatrice's glove, stained but innocent, fell in his haste. Vernon's eyes blazed, his voice sharp. Lies you've nothing. Miss Marple's tone was mild, her finger tracing the scuff ultramarine, Vernon's mark. Not Lawrence's. Back in the dining room, the family stood, candles low, their faces stark. Miss Marple explained the codicil named Eliza, threatened Vernon's scheme, sparked panic. Gerald's head sank, his voice low. I hired him, God forgive me. Miss Marple nodded. Shame wasn't murder, and Gerald's hands were clean. Beatrice wept. Her shawl crumpled. She'd leave Netherby, she said. Start anew, her love for Vernon Ashe. Miss Marple patted her arm. Her scarf soft Beatrice's heart broke, not Sir Reginald's neck. Lawrence muttered, knew he was rotten. His paint-flecked hand still, and Miss Marple's smile pride healed, not killed. Eliza rose, her locket open, her voice steady. Thank you, Miss Marple, father's truth lives. Miss Marple's eyes warmed. Eliza's gift was peace, not greed. Harrow led Vernon out, his cuffs clinking, his rage a hiss. Miss Marple was wrong, he'd prove it. The Grange's hall echoed, its portraits glaring, and Miss Marple lingered, her scarf catching a draft. Clara whispered, Jane, you did it. Miss Marple murmured, not yet, Clara, truth needs telling. They walked to the village, Netherby's lanterns swaying, gossip fading to of Ernan caught, the Grange freed. The tea shop's windows steamed, villagers peering, but Miss Marple passed, her steps light, the riddles weightlifting. She pictured the study, Vernon climbing, Sir Reginald's scoff, the cord's hitch greed, tied it, not love. Clara's cottage glowed, firelight dancing, tea steaming on the table. Miss Marple knitted, her scarf lengthening, its wool warm under lamplight. Clara sat, her voice soft. Jane, he's done. Harrow's got him. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind clear, the ladder's wax, the knot's craft. The codicil's ash all Vernon's, his panic a noose. Tomorrow, Clara, she said, we'll finish it. Truth ties tighter than cords. Clara grinned, her teacup steady, but Miss Marple's eyes held the fire. The riddle's end sharp Vernon's greed locked the study, but she'd unlocked it, stitch by stitch. Netherby slept, its lanes dark, the Grange's chimneys faint. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the scarf a soft heap. Gerald's shame would fade, Beatrice's resolve would grow. Lawrence's art would bloom, Eliza's gift would heal, Vernon's shadow alone darkened the Grange. His cufflinks damning, his not fatal. She climbed the stairs, the cottage creaking, her steps light. The village exhaled, its secrets spilled, and Miss Marple listened. The trap's snap, echoing in her mind truth, caught fast, and Vernon fell. Chapter 10. The riddle-solved morning broke clear over Netherby, sunlight gilding the village's thatched roofs, the air fresh with dew and promise. Miss Marple sat in Clara Bantry's parlor, her knitting folded beside a teapot, her spectacles glinting as Inspector Harrow settled opposite, his notebook open, his mustache still. Clara poured tea, her scarf neat, her voice soft. Vernon was jailed, the Grange quiet. Netherby's gossip now praised for Miss Marple's wit. Miss Marple's smile was faint, her scarf steady. The riddle was solved, but truth needed telling. Stitch by stitch, she began, her voice mild, tracing the study's shadows, Sir Reginald strangled, the cord sailor's hitch, the key in his pocket, windows sealed. A locked room, she said, but locks open, given the right hands. Harrow nodded, his pen scratching, and Miss Marple wove the tale, her mind clear as the village's dawn. The codicil sparked it, she explained. Sipping tea, Eliza, named as Sir Reginald's daughter, born of a hidden affair, set to inherit all, cutting Gerald and Beatrice out. Vernon, alias James Carver, a conman tied to Gerald's debts, saw his scheme crumble, his easy money gone unless Sir Reginald fell. Miss Marple's needles rested, her eyes sharp. He climbed the ladder, its rungs scuffing ultramarine paint, waxed to hide haste. Tied the cord, his sailor's knot deft from tattooed hands. Pried the drawer, burning the codicil to ash. Clara gasped, her cup clinking. Jane, so simple. Miss Marple shook her head. Simple, but cruel. Vernon's panic choked a man, staged. A lock left a scuff. Harris scribbled, his voice gruff. Proof solid prints, not ash. Vernon's confession came at dawn. Miss Marple continued. Her scarf soft against her coat, Harrow's men pressed him, and he broke, admitting the climb, the cord, the codicil's threat. Sir Reginald laughed. Vernon had snarled, called me a worm. Miss Marple's eyes warmed. Pride sparked murder, but greed tied the knot. She pictured the study, Vernon's hands swift, Sir Reginald's scoff cut short. The latter moved to the shed by dawn. Beatrice's glove, stained blue, fell in his rush. She'd followed, not killed, her love blind. Lawrence's paint matched the scuff, but his pride was no noose snipping, not strangling, moved his ladder. Gerald's debts hired Vernon, but shame, not murder, shook his hands. Eliza's locket held truth, her birth, her grief, no crime. Clara leaned forward, her teacup steaming. Jane, how do you know? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, the scuff's wax, polished to hide, wasn't a servant's touch. The knot's hitch, sailor's craft, wasn't Netherby's. The ashes vellum, not paper, screamed codicil. She'd seen Vernon's cufflinks, lying crested, matching Gerald's lost one small, but threads tied tight. The tea-shop's gossip, the barmaid's tailies, the churchyard's grave, all pointed to Vernon's greed, his city debts a noose before the cord. Harrow grunted, his pen still. Neat Miss Marple neater than most. Miss Marple sipped tea, her scarf steady. Neatness was truth's gift, and she gave it freely. The Grange's gate stood open, and Miss Marple walked there with Clara, the manor's stone warm in the sun. Gerald met them, his tie straight, brandy gone sobriety. He vowed, his voice low, to honor his father. Miss Marple nodded, her heart sure shame healed, not killed. Beatrice waited by the yews, her suitcase packed, her silk dress simple sheet. Leave for London, she said, to mend her heart. Vernon's lies ash. Miss Marple patted her arm, her scarf soft. Beatrice's resolve was no murder, her steps now free. Lawrence lingered, his cuffs clean, a canvas under his armbrighter. He said, for galleries, not graves. Miss Marple smiled. Pride painted, not choked. Eliza stood last, her locket open, her voice steady. The Grange would house Netherby's poor, her mother's shame a gift. Miss Marple's eyes warmed. Eliza's peace was no noose. Netherby's green bustled, the tea-shop steaming, villagers nodding as Miss Marple passed, Clara chatting of scones. The postmistress waved, her pince-nez glinting letters came, but none with lion crests now. The barmaid grinned, her tailies of Vernon done, and Miss Marple paused by the churchyard, Eliza's grave quiet, its moss soft. She pictured Vernon's cell, his cufflinks dull, his knot, his own trap greed tied him as it tied Sir Reginald. Clara nudged her. Jane, you're a marvel. Miss Marple murmured, just curious, Clara, but her mind held the study. Its shadows gone, truth's light stark. The station's platform was damp, Miss Marple's train puffing steam, its whistle sharp. She stood with Clara, her knitting bag slung, her scarf complete, its wool pale in the sun. Clara hugged her, tears welling. Jane, come back soon. Miss Marple smiled, her spectacles glinting. Netherby's piece was hers, but St. Mary Mead. Called. She boarded, settling by the window, her needles clicking anew, a mitten the gun. The village faded, its chimneys faint, the Grange's stone a memory. She thought of Gerald's vow, Beatrice's journey, Lawrence's art, Eliza's gift, each freed, as truth freed them. Vernon's knot was his own, his greed a lock Miss Marple opened. The train chugged through fields, hedgerows green, the air sweet with hay. Miss Marple knitted, her mitten growing, her mind light. Netherby's riddle was simple, greed climbed, panic struck, truth caught. She'd seen it before in St. Mary Mead, in faces hiding shame, love, pride. The scuffs waxed, the knots. Hitch, the lockets gleam, they spoke and she listened. A child across the aisle laughed, crumbs on his coat, and Miss Marple smiled. Life went on as riddles did. The whistle sounded, the carriage rocking, and she leaned back, her needles. Steady, Netherby's truth a stitch in time.